Good morning on this, at least in Madison. It's a lovely, I think, rainy Tuesday morning. I appreciate you all being here once again. And I was noticing, just we have so many wonderful team members that have contributed to this effort. You've seen a lot of them as you've been watching this presentation each day passing on the screen. Definitely the entire Covering Wisconsin team contributes to this effort in so many big and small ways. But we also have the conference steering committee, who includes Maciel Gomez, Rebecca Repholz, Amy Sather, Shelley Knorr, John Rathman, Julia Garvey, Justin Rivas, Jennifer Ball, Michael Moriarty, and Helena Gilbertson. Really appreciate their contribution. This really often starts many months in advance with coming together, talking through what's happening in current coverage policy, programming. What do we think will be the topics of interest in this time of year, which, as you all know, things happen so fast. It's sometimes hard to predict. But I so appreciate it. And again, just wanted to specifically name all of their help and support in this effort. And then, of course, if this is something that is of interest to you, contributing to what you have been seeing on stage in future years, the content, the topics, the speakers, please do reach out. We always welcome additional voices and perspectives, which would just be great to have you if that's of interest. So again, please do reach out. And I want to thank all of you again for your commitment to this work. So whether you have been doing this for a number of years or this is completely new to you, it's an effort, we know, to pursue and maintain your licensing for Wisconsin. And we hope that this event supports that, of course, but also your ability to serve the consumers, which is really what it comes down to, is our ability to help the diverse communities of Wisconsin navigate this terribly complex and never-ending confusion of health insurance. So thank you again for being here, for supporting this work in your own way by contributing your questions, which are always great to see. So please do continue to do that. As a reminder, you use the Q&A function, as I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with now and hearing us say. You can put in those questions throughout the session, and sometimes it could be helpful as questions come to mind, even if it's not a moment when Q&A is happening. Just put those questions in, and even if the speaker does respond to them in their presentation, that's great. It's best that we know what's on your mind and what things you may still find confusing or are wondering about. And of course, if you have technical questions just about the platform or can't hear or any number of things, use that live help. It's in the top right corner of your screen, and then you can get more direct assistance with that. And as a reminder, we will be doing an evaluation. We'll share that out with all of you tomorrow. It will be available in the session information part of your screen on the right-hand side. We'll call it out again tomorrow, but just want to give you a heads up to take a look for that. And with that, we're going to take one last pause before we get started this morning at 9:15. And so grab your coffee or grab whatever you need to, and then we'll get settled in about 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody. All right. Well, I think there's going to be a quiz on that presentation tomorrow, so I bet you all have it memorized by now. But seriously, I'm happy to welcome back to the stage, covering Wisconsin's Adam Van Spankeren for this next session. So Adam, I will hand it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. Really happy to be back here doing something very different, but no less important than what we covered last Friday when I was last on. So this one's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing and introduce the esteemed colleagues from DHS who will be helping me and hopefully providing some context and answering some Q&A. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So yeah, this is going to be MAGI and more, the ins and outs of income counting. I was asked to do MAGI and counting income for this just because of so many questions that have come up through the different enrollment assister networks in the last year plus. There's always great questions that come through, but hopefully there will be a slight emphasis on the and more, especially for the Q&A. I hope people feel empowered to ask anything they want, especially while we do have some DHS representation, but also at the end when we're talking about marketplace stuff, because there's just so much great knowledge and so many great tips and tricks that people have that will be beneficial to new and veteran assisters. I will say that because this is a DHS heavy day, we have this presentation where I'll be joined by some staff from DHS and the one after this. I just want to preface the presentation just by saying if there's any members of the media in the audience, this session is not to be viewed as a press conference. Any on the record media questions should be directed to the Office of the Department of Health Services and the Commissioner of Insurance. So thank you for that. And yeah, please use the Q&A function. I won't be able to see it while I'm sharing. I've got slides and presentation in front of me, but I do have a number of really trusted colleagues here who will be monitoring it and will be able to stop me, although there will be 2 specific question breaks, which is a little different than what I normally do. We'll be stopping about the midpoint after we talk about Badger Care Plus to dive into any MAGI and Badger Care questions, and then at the end for Marketplace and free-for-all. So I will like to introduce myself again, Adam Van Spankeren. I'm the Navigator Program Manager at Covering Wisconsin. I've been here for 7 years in this role and similar when I was the regional lead. And before that, I was at DHS. And before that, I was at ABC for Health. So just accruing knowledge the whole way. I am going to wait to introduce Maciel just a moment because we did pick up a late addition who is not represented here on the slides, and that is Rachel Whithoff. She, many of you who have done pre-licensing a couple of years plus ago will remember her from that. She is a healthcare eligibility policy analyst for the Department of Health Services. She primarily focuses on Badger Care and family planning only services. She's been with DHS since 2011 and has a master's degree in social work from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So thank you, Rachel, for joining us. And I would also like to introduce Maciel Gomez, who is back with us, who is employed at DHS. She's been doing Medicaid for over 20 years. And she did send me a bio, but I think I'd just like to enhance it a little bit to say, you know, that Maciel is nothing short of the linchpin between DHS and the enrollment assisters, the partners. She's responsible for sharing so much of the information from DHS, for answering all of our clarifying questions and getting those to the right people, advocating for both members across the state in English and in Spanish, and really just being an ear and a voice that we can interact with in a role that is, you know, tantamount to the face of DHS for the enrollment assister community and the partner community. So it can't be any more thrilled to have Maciel joining me once again for her partnership and all the work that she does for us. You guys, Rachel, Maciel, have anything you'd like to add before we get started?
Just thank you, Adam, for such a wonderful introduction, and I'm excited to have this session today.
Great.
Yes, same here. Thank you, Adam.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Glad you're here. We're going to go ahead and get started right away with one of our poll questions. I just want to get one out of the way because I'm curious to see just how well some of this content is going to land, and if I'm kind of right about where we may want to focus some of our energy, or at the very least can predict some of the questions we're going to get. So what programs, rules, and nuances do you find most complex? And I will say that for this, I am speaking Yeah, I don't normally preface my presentations with an apology of any kind, but I will say that we're going back to school a little bit on this one. So this is for enrollment assisters. So that these are the people that, after my wife and child, I care about the most probably in the state. Sorry, college friends. No, enrollment assisters do so much for Wisconsin and all the people in it. And like I said, we're going back to school a little bit. So if this isn't you, if you're not an enrollment assister, this might not land as nicely as some of the other presentations at that higher level. But hopefully the people who really need this will find this useful. That said, hopefully the poll is up, and you can say Marketplace eligibility, Badger Care Plus eligibility, EBD Medicaid eligibility, or something else. That something else may be Medicare, obviously something not that I didn't call out specifically because we don't really focus on it, especially navigators. We're not licensed to do Medicare, but when we do interact with it, it can be confusing.
Yeah, and the poll is up, and we're still receiving a few votes, so maybe we'll give it just about 5 more seconds, and then perhaps Hannah or her team can share the results. And do you see those on your screen there, Adam?
I don't. I can't see anything.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it looks like about 45% say EBD Medicaid eligibility is what they find most complex. After that, Marketplace eligibility, and then at 18% Badger Care Plus. The something else is 4%, the mystery of the something else.
Interesting. Yeah, I wish we could know exactly what, but no, that's interesting. Not surprising. I assumed EBD would be the highest. That is tends to be my greatest area of confusion at the very least, where I find I'm looking things up. And I will say that you're not going to walk away from this presentation being an expert in EBD. You probably already are, maybe on your way to becoming an expert in Marketplace Badger Care. But that EBD bucket of programs, the full benefit Medicaid programs and the waiver programs, they're just so nuanced and so complex that they're always going to require that extra level of care. And the person who I find is most expert in them, aside from disability benefit specialists and elderly benefit specialists, the ADRCs who do this all the time, is the navigator or CAC who had to do it yesterday, who has it all fresh in their mind because they just looked it up. So what are we going to cover in this session? We're going to dive into resources first, the essential resources for enrollment assisters. Normally I save that stuff for the end, but I really want to make sure that people know exactly what the tools of our trade are before we dive in, so we can see where some of this information is coming from. People get really familiar with using them if they aren't already. We're going to do an overview and refresher on the fundamentals of MAGI. I think that's probably the most just inherently complex subject we're covering. I always find MAGI a little bit abstruse and hard to dive into, but this one might be a little bit dense. Hopefully we can make it fun, but I started with examples that were covered in pre-licensing and then took variations based on questions that I received from enrollment assistants throughout the year. And hopefully we will have some fun forming MAGI groups together. Then, you don't see my slides anymore? Okay, let's see what happened there. All right, I wonder if there was a button I hit. Let's reshare.
Hannah, while he's doing that, can you just give a quick blurb as to what people can do if they don't have sound on their computer?
Yeah, if anyone is having issue, just exit and come back in. Adam is fully on screen right now talking, and but this session will be recorded if anyone has any issues.
Right, can you see the slides again? Okay, great. I think there's if I hit enter on this one thing on the bottom, it'll stop sharing. So I'll be careful not to do that again. So after fundamentals of MAGI, we'll dive right into Badger Care Plus, and we'll build on some of those things that come up quite a lot. We're going to revisit gap filling in a major way. We're going to talk about income extensions for Badger Care Plus before we shift into EBD Medicaid with a particular emphasis on MAP, as that comes up more than any other EBD program. And then we're going to look at one other Medicaid program that I'm going to use as kind of a representative of the larger bucket of different community-based waiver programs, home and community-based waiver programs, before we dive into Marketplace and hopefully do the and more as a Q&A. So again, Enrollment Sisters, this is for you. Please use this time to ask your questions, and we will have that question break in the middle and again at the end. So essential resources, this is a list. This is kind of a variant on what Mike Rust shared last week at his presentation. I think that was last week. The time kind of flows together. But he had a really great list of the different things we can put in front of us to do this work. And yeah, I think from his, I learned that there's no upper limit on how many resources you might find useful. But I tried to narrow it down a little bit to the ones that I use the most, the ones I want handy all the time. In researching this presentation alone, I had the Badger Care Plus handbook up and Medicaid eligibility handbook up on my screen for weeks, as I do when I'm helping consumers throughout the state. And then just remember that these are all in addition to the applications themselves. So access.wisconsin.gov and healthcare.gov, they're sophisticated tools. As much as we might like to gripe about them, they are advanced. They will do most of the heavy lifting in terms of the math for you, in terms of forming groups, in terms of determining income. But it's when we need to look at the nuances of each individual situation that the human component comes back in. But there is no real average consumer. There are situations we might see typically, but every single one is going to be a variation with slightly different challenges and factors to consider in the home. So we've got the Badger Care Plus handbook, the Medicaid eligibility handbook, Health Reform Beyond the Basics. I want to call out really and emphasize for people just because, one, they're doing their 2024 series of webinars right now. So if you weren't watching this, I hope you would be watching that. And they have the really handy reference chart, the yearly guidelines already updated for next year, which includes, not only things like FPLs, it has repayment caps, which we'll look at later, and just a bunch of other resources, numbers, things that you might, that might come up in a given appointment with a consumer. So it's a great one to have. I think it's two-sided, or at least 2 pages, so you can make it two-sided and keep it right next to you while you're meeting with a consumer. The FPL calculator, my favorite one is on my coverage plan. So that's the one that's produced and sponsored by ABC for Health. It does a really nice job breaking out the different eligibility levels and calculating using either years thresholds, because again, as I mentioned last week, with the Marketplace, you're always going to be looking back at the previous years, whereas the Badger Care eligibility, you're going to use the current one. So being able to switch back and forth between those is really useful, plus the plan breakdown. So I highly recommend bookmarking that one. And then Income Maintenance Consortium, Department of Health Services are really collaboration has been mentioned in multiple sessions at this conference and really emphasized. And you have partners like Maciel, but also just getting to know your income maintenance agencies. I think Jory Mundy talked about that last week. And it's so useful to know an IM worker or IM supervisor, somebody that you can refer your complex cases to. And as we look at MAGI and we look at income counting, the most common question that I find myself asking an IM worker and IM supervisor is just, what are you seeing in your system? What do you see? Because what I see is what the consumer gave me, and I'm looking at all my best available information. But the system might be picking something else up or picking up something differently. And it can be really useful to get a perspective on what that system, that CARES worker web, is picking up and how they're interpreting a consumer situation. So then we have the Forward Health Partners page on the Department of Health Services website, that Forward Health email inbox I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, Covering Wisconsin fact sheets, which are arrayed here. We produce so many fact sheets. They look inverted to me on my screen, but maybe they're not. We'll see. They're not backwards, I promise, when they actually do appear on our site. And if we have any topics that we aren't covering, please let us know. There's always more room to work on these, and our communications team love developing new resources. We consumer test all of them, and they are really, really useful, especially if you get a chance to sit down with or share with a consumer, as the case may be, preemptively before an appointment if you know what challenges they're going to be facing. There we go. All right, so I'm going to dive right into the fundamentals of MAGI. So this is going to be a little bit review. So I did take what was covered in pre-licensing, which for some of you might be 10 years ago. So there's a little bit of review here. Hopefully it's not too dull, but modified adjusted gross income, or MAGI rules, are used to determine the household size and household income for Badge Care Plus eligibility and for the marketplace. So for those advanced premium tax credits to the marketplace. And when we're using MAGI rules, we're determining size of the household, which household members are in that in the household, so which one's income to include, and then what types of incomes and deductions are counted. So this is, we might not think of it in these terms all the time because, again, we're using the application and we're using our own experience, but this is what we're doing. And as Julia Garvey's fond of saying, numeracy is just a big part of this work, and we get used to looking at all these numbers. So even though it might become automatic after a while, it is something that that you will be good at. Numeracy, whether you know it or not, you will become expert in it, at least for the context of doing this work. But do remember that the applications themselves are going to do some of that heavy lifting for you. Determining household size with MAGI can be complex. If it wasn't, I don't think I would be doing this presentation today. But there are two broad camps of rules that we use to determine household information using MAGI. So first, there's tax rules, which I think are more common, and we default to these more often than not. I did say that there's not a typical consumer household, but there are things that happen more frequently than others. So in tax rules, the household size is based on who is planning to file taxes and who they're claiming as tax dependents. So that should be a really familiar concept. And then in other cases, we're going to use relationship rules, where the household size is based on how the household members are related to each other. So in a single home or a single case, consumer you're working with, you might have different household members using different sizes, which is where it starts to get confusing. And we're going to dive into some complex examples in a little bit here. So tax rules: if an adult in the household is planning to file taxes and is not being claimed as a tax dependent by someone else, the household is going to include the tax filer, their spouse if they have one, and then the tax dependents. For relationship rules, in most cases, the adult is not planning to file taxes. The household is going to include the adult, spouse, their children under age 19 who are living there. The operative words being in most cases. So we're going to look at some interesting ones. And hopefully, if you guys have any questions or if I need to elaborate on something, I have Rachel and Maciel here to jump in and add some context. Okay. This, again, if you haven't done pre-licensing a long time, or if you've been doing this work for a long time, you might not remember this. This is the most of the lovely chart that DHS developed for identifying the different household members in a group for MAGI. And you're going to choose the target. So you basically start by picking a person, and then you ask if they're going to file taxes. And then you build off of those answers to figure out if somebody else is claiming them. And just use that to develop who is in the household. And I should have included a citation on this slide. So we'll make sure this gets linked up when we publish these after the fact. Okay, so I promised some examples, and we are going to have some good ones. In this one, Marcus, Isabel, and Julius are teenage siblings under age 19 who live with their Aunt Gina. So Gina is a tax filer. She's planning to file taxes and claim all 3 children as tax dependents this year. And again, it's for tax filing, we're always looking at expected to file. What is a person expecting to do for the next year? So using the tax rules, Gina's household size is 4 because she is a tax filer with 3 tax dependents. And then because the children are being claimed by somebody who is not their parent, relationship rules end up getting used. So each child has a household size of 3, themselves and their 2 siblings. So if you guys may remember this one from pre-licensing, it is a variation on that, as these are all variations on those ones and different questions that have come up in the last year. So not too bad for that first one. Other circumstances to keep in mind. Tax dependents can be included in someone's household size even if they are living outside the home or are deceased. So tax filers can claim a deceased child as a tax dependent or a deceased spouse as a co-filer in the year that they pass, and they would be included in the tax filer's group size. So that is a little bit more uncommon, but that is something that if you do this work long enough, you will end up seeing. Spouses must always be included unless they're living separately and filing taxes separately, We'll talk more about the implications and exceptions to filing taxes separately a little bit later. To be considered living with a parent, a child under age 19 must be in the parent's home at least 40% of the time. If parents are divorced, only one parent can claim the child was tax dependent each year. That's pretty straightforward. We often see, and we'll look at examples including divorce, where the parent claiming each child switches back and forth, and it's really important to know what is the intention of that tax filer for the next year. And then tax rules are based on how the person plans to file taxes, as I said. Like, it bears repeating. Okay, so we have another example here where Evelyn is divorced and lives with her 15-year-old daughter, Lisa. She plans to file taxes, but Lisa's father, Dimitri, plans to claim Lisa as a tax dependent this year. So using tax rules, we have Evelyn, despite the fact that she is living with her daughter, she has household size of 1, MAGI household size of 1, because she's a tax filer with no tax dependents. And then because Dimitri is a parent who lives outside the home and is claiming Lisa, then we use the relationship rules for Lisa. So her household size is going to be 2, herself and her mother. And then just real quick, Rachel, Marcia, anything you wanted to add on any of these yet?
Nothing yet.
Okay, great. Another example here, Eric and Ryan live together but are not married. They have 2 children, Alice and Graham, who are 5 and 7. Eric plans to file taxes and claim both children as tax dependents. Ryan is also planning to file taxes. So they are living together, but they're not married, and they're going to file separately. Using tax rules, Eric's household size is 3 because he's a tax filer with 2 tax dependents. And then again, tax rules for Ryan, household size is 1 because they're a tax filer with no dependents. So these are situations, again, I mentioned these are fairly real examples. You're going to see this. You're going to see a lot of consumers who are living together, not married, switching up what they intend to do for their taxes. And it's really good to know who's going to be counted on whose taxes, and then therefore in whose MAGI group. So for the children in this case, the relationship rules are used because their parents are living together but not filing jointly. Each household or each child's household size is going to be 4 because it's going to be themselves, their sibling, and the 2 parents. So we've got 4 different people and 3 different household compositions for MAGI. And then here is a little bit more interesting one, at least in my opinion, where Mark and Rob are divorced and not living together. Before their divorce, they adopted twins, Kate and Jesse, who are 16. Before their adoption, twins were in foster care. Twins live with each parent 50% of the time, and each parent plans to claim one of the children on their taxes. Mark and Rob have a household size of 2 using tax rules, and because they are a tax filer who each has 1 tax dependent. But what rules are we going to use to determine the household for the children? And again, this is, I did include a citation for this one. Thanks to Rachel for providing it and reviewing the example from Badger Criminal's Handbook, the section on joint placement. So I'm just going to call out some specific information from that section where this is similar to a case I received earlier this year. But with joint custody arrangements, the child can still only be open on 1 Badger Care case. So it's important to know they're not going to be parts of 2 different active cases. The joint placement section has info on that. But let's say Mark and Rob agree the children will receive Badger Care benefits on Mark's, then you'd go ahead and follow the chart in that section. But let's pick Kate as the target in this case. And let's say she isn't filing taxes, so we would go to step 3 in that chart that we use. She's being claimed as tax dependent, and the tax filer is her parent. She does not live in the household with both parents. So then if it gets that she will be claimed as tax dependent by a parent living outside the household, we have 2 variations. So in variation A, let's say Mark is claiming her as tax dependent, then her MAGI group is using tax rules where her household size is 2, the same as Mark's. And that's more straightforward. But in variation B, we have Rob, who's planning to claim her as tax dependent. Then we're going to go ahead and use relationship rules and include her, Jesse, who's a sibling under 19 living in the same household, and Mark, who's a parent living in the same household for a household size of 3. And then just as Jesse's MAGI group, and then in turn would be whichever variation is not used for Kate because they're being claimed as tax dependent by the other parent. So that is about as dense as one as you can expect. And if there are questions on that, we can revisit this during the first Q&A break, which will be coming up after the Badger Care section. But in that household, you have a kind of a myriad of rules in play and options, because it's important to know when you talk to the consumer that what they may do can change, and that they may work out with you what their plans are based on how the coverage is going to work out for themselves and their tax dependents, for their dependents. So that is really important for you to know how that can be put together in the different ways that their income might be counted. And next, I do have, just as a fun little break, I have what I'm going to refer to as a pop quiz, a callback on former foster care youth, because again, I am targeting this at enrollment assisters. So if you're not, this might mean nothing to you, and that's okay. But this is true or false. I mentioned that the girls, Kate and Jesse, were in foster care. Because they're in foster care as children, Kate and Jesse will be categorically eligible for Badger Care Plus with no income limit until they turn 26. So let's go ahead and put that up if it isn't already, and give people a minute to think about it and supply their answers. Is that going, esteemed colleagues? Excellent. And if we can share those, what are people responding with? Okay, so that is really interesting. The answer is false, which is why this is a bit of a pop quiz, because they were not in foster care when they turned 18. That is the kind of the key rule that often gets glossed over when we're discussing former foster care youth. We don't see it a lot, but when you do see it, I remember when my instinct was to get really excited. Oh, they're in foster care. They're going to be categorically eligible. That's all I need to know. It wasn't until later that I looked at it more closely and realized they need to be in foster care when they turn 18. So in this case, it would be false. All right.
And Adam, there are a few questions, and I'm just wondering, and I think they relate to some of the content you just reviewed. If you want,
sure,
those now, or
I never mind a little variation, and I certainly wouldn't mind a break talking to listen to them. So let's go ahead. If you think they're any particularly relevant, let's go ahead and field those.
Well, you can decide. Maybe feel free to hold on some of these. One question is, what do you do if a person indicates that someone will claim them as a dependent? Just wondering, never had this scenario.
If somebody indicates that they're going to claim them as a dependent, that's a pretty broad kind of field. It's what we were doing when we were looking at the different targets. That's kind of how we were determining the household size. So it's just like what we were doing in the middle of the example when we picked an individual who's going to be claimed by somebody else. I don't know if Rachel, you wanted to elaborate on that at all, because I think it's kind of baked in to what I had indicated here, but if you have further thoughts on it, I'd enjoy hearing them.
Sure, like you said, a little bit complicated because it really depends on the scenario, but like Adam said, I do recommend that folks take a look at, I think Adam, you said you would share the link to the that chart that you had shared from the Badger Care Plus handbook that sort of shows how to form a MAGI group. And so there are parts in there where, depending on if the person is expected to be claimed as somebody else, you can sort of follow the flow, and it'll show you sort of where the person lands as far as who would be in their MAGI group.
Yep.
So I think once you share that with this group, they'll be able to sort of follow through based on their own sort of examples and figure out how that would land.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. And then we have two here that are related to, I think, like college or university enrollment. The first one, how does school enrollment, hold on a second here. How does school enrollment impact a dependent being counted in a household? I have had IM ask if the 18-year-old has graduated high school.
Yeah, if I may, I'd like to kick that one over to DHS just because I haven't seen that in a while. And that's not because it's not common. It's just because I haven't done any back to school yet this year. So Rachel or Maciel, do you have thoughts on somebody 18 graduated from high school?
Sure, I can take that one. I think it's actually, I think there's maybe two different policies coming into play here. One of them has to do with what we're talking about today with, forming a MAGI group and whose income we're counting. But the other one has to do with another policy. Not really related to this. So one of them is, I believe that the reason why we're asking about if a 18-year-old has graduated from high school or not, that's because we're trying to identify a concept called dependent 18-year-olds. And really that impacts whether the adult in the household, the parent or caretaker relative in the household, can still have Badger Care Plus as a parent or caretaker relative, or if they need to have their eligibility determined as what we would call a childless adult, so an adult with no minor dependents in the household. And so that's a whole separate concept. And my understanding is that is why we are asking about, if the 18-year-old in your household has graduated from high school or not, because there's different criteria on determining if that's a so-called dependent 18-year-old. As far as the question about out-of-home tax dependents, yes, tax filers are able to claim individuals who live outside of their home as their tax dependents. And a common example is, college students. So people can, claim those outside tax dependents, and that does factor into, or can factor into if we're turns out we're using tax filing rules to determine your, your MAGI household. That can determine, can factor into your group size. I do want to say though that the actual college student, if they're 19 and older, they themselves can't get Badger Care Plus on the same case as their parents. So their parent could, if their parent's claiming them as a tax dependent, they can factor into the parent's tax household, size of their tax household for the parent's eligibility on the parent's Badger Care Plus case. But the adult child will need to, if the adult child wants to have Badger Care Plus, they may need to apply on their own case for themselves, and for their eligibility will again for them go through this sort of flow chart and figure out who to count in their household.
Yeah, and that's a good callback to what you mentioned earlier, where they're going to mention somebody else is claiming them.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So they would get questions about that, and that could be a scenario, like you said, Adam, where somebody is saying that yes, somebody is claiming me as a tax dependent. Somebody outside my household is claiming me as a tax dependent. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think that's all for now. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Then we will keep trucking along. That might eat into our Q&A time later, but I'm glad we fielded them while they were the most relevant. So let's keep pressing through here on the MAGI overview and refresher. I mentioned this, and I just want to call it out in more specific detail. That sometimes things change. I've gotten this question a few times, and I'm certainly asked it myself a few times. What happens when I'm working with a consumer who say they're going to claim child no taxes? Say I talked to them in March, but then it gets to be November, or maybe even into the next year when they're looking at filing taxes, and because of a change in circumstances, something has changed in their relationship or their household, they end up not doing that. They acted in good faith, but something has changed. So in that case, the member would not have to pay any back benefits, which is the usual concern, if their tax filer and dependent situation is different than what they had anticipated and reported. DHS and IM agencies no longer establish new Badger Care Plus overpayment claims for members, which is good. But then it's really, really important to remember, as you're working with consumers, to tell them if they do have a change in tax filing status or dependence, they should report that immediately to IM agency so they can apply those changes to the case. So not to sit on that information. So when they do know or anticipate something is going to be different, they should get in touch with you as their assister. I think that's probably the easiest thing for them to remember. That's what I always tell people, is just if anything changes, let me know. Okay, then let's go ahead and do some break from MAGI, break from that particularly complex stuff, and dive into one of the categories that people indicated wasn't quite as confusing, and that is Badger Care Plus. Everybody's kind of we should end up knowing it by the back of our hand as we do this work, but there's always more nuance to explore. The income types, counted or not counted. Most taxable income is going to be counted for Badger Care Plus. This should be a pretty classic review here. That's including, not limited to, taxable gross earnings from a job. And again, I would just like to highlight gross earnings from a job, especially in this age of remote assistance, because as we work with people, we aren't seeing face-to-face. You ask them what they make, they might be very tempted, and I think understandably so, to tell you the net pay, because that's what they take home. That's what they feel they earned. But you're always going to be looking at gross for pretty much everything we do. Taxable earnings from self-employment, Social Security income, unemployment compensation, and then financial aid if it's used for living expenses. So thinking again about those college student examples, if it's going to be used for living, room and board, that kind of thing. Taxable retirement, pension, annuities, and then any interest in dividends, which are a little less common, but does happen. And then, so what's not counted for Badger Care is going to be child support. I think that's one of the most common ones. And then alimony, spousal support, maintenance payments received under separation or divorce agreement completed after January 1st, 2019. Supplemental security income, or SSI, which we'll touch briefly on SSI-related Medicaid later. Gifts or money from another person, workers' comp, and veterans benefits. So that should all be some pretty typical review here. But we want to look at gap filling because it is something that we end up using a lot. And it is something that especially the newer sisters on here should become familiar with because it will help a lot of people that you end up working with get coverage. Gap filling, I'm just going to be really specific here for this review. It just refers to the way the Badger Care Plus eligibility can be determined using the annual income instead of the monthly income. So when monthly income is above program limits, if somebody has a really good month or something, maybe their employment is ending and they're not going to be back to work for a while, if they're over the monthly income limit, so their annual would not be. So parents, caretakers, childless adults may be eligible for Badger Care Plus using annual income. Process was automated in February 2023. If parent, caretaker, childless adult is over the monthly income limit, the eligibility system will automatically check if they're eligible using annual income. Applicants and members do not need to ask the RIM agency to use annual income. I will saying this, and I'm going to put a big caveat on it because I know the sister experience. I know there's some room for improvement yet in the automation, and it is something that we will, as a sisters, be trained and continue to double check until we have gone years without it ever messing up. So it's something that you're going to want to double check as you look at somebody's income. You're going to look almost certainly always at their monthly and annual when it's close to those limits. And you're going to double check to make sure the system is doing it right. And if it's not, you're going to get on the phone with an IM worker like we used to and make sure that it goes through. So like other Badger Care Plus members, applicants found eligible under gap filling rules are certified under a 12-month period. This is a rolling 12-month certification period that could start and end any time of the month or any time of the year. Members can keep their certification period even if they change from using monthly income to annual income rules when they report changes. Because the 12-month certification period often extends over 2 calendar years, the applicant's expected annual income will be collected at the beginning of the new year. So it might not be something they can verify, probably unlikely to be able to verify their income at the beginning of the new year, but the IM agency may ask to basically validate the reported expected annual income based on the best available information. So again, verification of the next year's annual income is not required, but an increase in annual income above the FPL limits of Badger Care Plus could make an applicant ineligible at that time. So again, always reporting those changes. That's gap filling. We'll take questions if there's any question on gap filling at the end of this section. But we want to talk about earned income extensions for Badger Care Plus because this came up a lot this summer as everybody was relearning their Badger Care and Medicaid eligibility to do the unwinding. When a parent or caretaker relatives earn monthly income, so monthly is the key here. So earned monthly income. So we're not looking at gap filling. We're not looking at annual. Goes above 100% FPL due to increased earnings. Their eligibility and thus their children's eligibility is going to be extended by 12 months, which is huge. This does typically occur automatically upon reporting changes in income. I find this to be much more reliable than, say, something like gap filling, which still has some kinks to be worked out. No income limit for the household during the extension, and the extension continues as long as the household continues to meet the other non-financial criteria for the program. If the household's income will go below 100% FPL during the extension will end, and they will go back to normal Badger Care Plus, which shouldn't be a large, it's not a distinction coverage-wise for them. But extensions are also known as transitional medical assistance. And if all the members in the household are going to be eligible for the extension, verification of income is not required. But I will say the member must have been enrolled in Badger Care Plus with monthly income that was at or below 100% FPL for at least 3 of the 6 months immediately preceding the month in which the income went above 100% FPL. That's probably the most nuanced thing for an extension that I haven't actually encountered, but did encounter in reviewing this presentation with my colleagues at DHS. So 3 of the 6 months preceding the month for the increase, they should have been at or below 100% FPL. So that is just something you may find if you're going, hey, why didn't this trigger correctly? Now, an extension can end if all the children have left the household or turn 19. Then there are different extensions as well. So there's different for support extensions, which are based on spousal or family support income going up. And then when an extension ends, all the people who are eligible under the extension do lose Badger Care. So following the adverse action rules, basically, so they get their notice, and it'll be at the end of whichever month that is, unless they become eligible in a different category. And then a couple more things for Badger Care Plus as we dive into these more complicated aspects. So deductibles are a little bit rarer, I think, than income extensions, at least in terms of people actually going through the effort of applying them to their situation. And also they aren't going to be available for everybody because they're not going to function for childless adults. So these are available for children and pregnant women above 306 FPL and children above 156 who will get denied for Badger Care due to access to health insurance. It's going to be available for Badger Care Plus emergency services, so kind of an even rarer one, but remembering that's, again, for the same populations, because childless adults, just as a reminder, do not get, unfortunately, Badger Care Plus emergency services. Deductibles for Badger Care Plus are met when members incur medical expenses equal to the deductible amount. And then deductible amounts are calculated for a 6-month period using the amount of income that exceeds 150% FPL for children and 300 for pregnant women. And I did reference the section specifically on the deductibles because I did not feel, I did write out an example and I just didn't feel it did justice to this topic. It's something that I think every time I look at a situation and wonder if a deductible will work, I see medical expenses, I'm going to be looking up and relearning every single time. And probably still emailing Maciel and asking if this is right. So don't ever think that you will be outside of that boat or too good to look something up or contact another expert. And then backdating, just a highlight on this one. This one should be pretty bread and butter, especially as we're looking at the unwinding. So for those who may have missed the renewal date, they may request backdated coverage. Keeping in mind, verification must be provided in those cases to verify they're eligible for this month's. And not all Medicaid programs do allow backdating. And then income counting highlight. I just want to talk a little bit about Social Security. So not to be confused with SSI. It's not usually taxable, but it is counted. I did mention it as counted income. And always remember to include the gross amount because, again, they're going to get that statement, the SSDI, for example, where it's going to have the amount after it's been deducted. And then just because an income type is not taxable or won't be counted, as a reminder, doesn't mean don't include it on the application. Again, those applications will do a lot of heavy lifting for you. And then for an example that came up, wondering earlier this year, wondering why Social Security income wasn't counted in a particular case. The example wasn't specific to Social Security income, but children tax dependents who do not meet the income thresholds to be expected to be required to file, which is a mouthful, they would not have to count any of their income for Badger Care Plus, and that included, in this case, Social Security. So it wasn't specific to Social Security, but there are circumstances which you wouldn't count any income for somebody who isn't expected to be required to file because they're under those thresholds. Okay. Whew. We are at the midpoint Q&A. Time-wise, we have plenty, but I think we don't want to get stuck too long on questions, and I don't know how many there are, but we do have DHS here. So, Allison, what do we have for questions?
Yeah, we do have a questions here. So let's see if I can work backwards from when they were first submitted. So the first one says, I'm an insurance agent, so I don't assist with Badger Care enrollment, but I'm wondering what happens when I'm filling out an application for someone who answers yes to the questions about not being able to work. Their eligibility statement gives them an APTC amount, but it also states that their state will be in touch with them as well. I help them enroll in a marketplace plan, but what are their possibilities with Badger Care?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's one that I share actually. So I don't necessarily have the best answer because I've worked with hundreds of consumers where I've sat and I've answered that question, and usually the answer is that they're able to work because they often have job income, but that I have the same question. It comes up, and I say the state's going to reach out to them because that's what it says. And I always assume that this is going to apply in some way to the EBD Medicaid category that's coming up because of the disability that they've indicated. But oftentimes they don't have a disability determination, so there's nothing that really comes of it because that threshold can be different for each individual, and whether or not they're actually considered disabled versus unable to work can be different. But yeah, Maciel or Rachel, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I've often wondered what happens in terms of will the state contact them because they answered that question that way.
I would say that if the marketplace finds them within the threshold of the income below 100% of the FPL, then they would go ahead information with the states. We can do a follow-up, and they would send that as the access application. We would follow up with that application from Badger Care Plus Childless Adult,
Right.
possibly.
So if the income basically would result in a transfer to the state anyway, then that does give them a little bit of a shortcut to look at, say, EBD Medicaid versus Badger Care.
Yeah, and
Good question.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I'm guessing what might be happening in this scenario, right, is probably that the person's currently not able to work. And that's why it's coming to us, because their current monthly income, even though they might have had income in this past year that's making them eligible for APTCs or annual income that's making them eligible, it might be that their current income is zero because they're not currently working, perhaps, and that's why it could possibly be coming to the state, and they could, like Maciel said, they could be eligible, or we could be looking at them for Badger Care Plus if it's an instance where they do not have a disability determination, or if they have a disability determination or age 65 and older, we could be looking at them for EBD Medicaid.
Sure.
It's coming to us, or why it's saying that your state will be getting back to you.
Yep. Okay. Next question.
Yeah. One is just a comment asking if you could slow down just a little bit. It's such a wealth of information, a lot of details, and it sounds like there's a lot of new staff. So just sharing that comment.
Maybe. We'll see.
We'll see.
I try.
All right. Let's see. When using access for the Badger Care application or renewal, it asks about annual income, has an option to select don't know /unsure. If you don't know your annual income, will the state still test for gap filling if you don't enter an income amount in that section?
Yeah. So I should say too that we do only check for gap filling if the only reason that an adult is failing for Badger Care Plus is because they're over the monthly income. So if there's other reasons why the person's not eligible for Badger Care Plus, we would not test for gap filling. It truly is the only reason why they are failing is because they're over our monthly income limit. And in that case, we would automatically test for gap filling in that point and look at the person's annual income. If we don't have your annual income on file, perhaps you didn't fill out that part of the application or something like that, then we would, at that point, we're testing for the gap filling for the annual income. We would follow up with the person with a letter asking them to provide information about their expected annual income for the current year. And so then we would use that and do the gap filling. So just because you don't fill out something, I mean, we recommend that if you do have that information, please do fill it out on the application. But if somebody does not know their information, that annual income information when they're filling out the application, don't worry, you didn't miss your chance to get gap filling. We will follow up with you and or follow up with the applicant and find out that information if it comes to the point where we're looking at gap filling.
Yeah.
And when Rachel says we will follow up, just the client should pay attention to the verification request checklist that we send out so that they can comply with any request of verification that we're sending out so that we can fully test them for the application that they submitted.
Yeah. And that is pretty common that people won't know. So yes, always watch for and then follow up on that verification checklist or VCL.
Another one is if a 19-year-old is being claimed by their parents, would this affect their Badger Care application? Is their parents' income being counted?
Sure. Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Sure. And Adam, I'm wondering if this might be a one where it'd be better to have that chart in the Badger Care Plus handbook. I don't know if that's easily available, or maybe if that's not easily available.
I think we could throw
scenario.
Yeah, it's definitely been linked in a couple of the other sessions, but I think we could throw it into the chat of the Q&A too. But I will say that will probably take a little bit extra time that we don't have. Yep. And also I remind folks that we can take, especially Maciel and I will be doing the live office hours on Friday to carry over any questions we don't get to today.
Yeah, and Adam, I would certainly be happy to take that question back and chart and then maybe sort of better explain those steps, and then that might also help any other variations of that scenario or similar college student scenario and things like that might help answer all of those questions all at once. So I can certainly take that back and provide that information back with you. Yeah,
and I think that's totally fair, because my first reaction upon hearing the question was, well, what is the circumstance with their parents and what's their income? And so yeah, it's hard to make an example from just that statement. But yeah, if you want to take it back, I'm sure that'd be greatly appreciated, Rachel.
Okay. And I don't know how much more time here, Adam, that you'd like to take for this section.
I would say let's press forward and see where we end up with Q&A at the end.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, so shifting from Badger Care Plus to the EBD Medicaid, we're going to narrow in specifically on MAP in just a minute here, because that is without a doubt the I think the program across any category that I get the most question about is MAP. And then we will look kind of a little bit into those circumstances. So EBD Medicaid is just a reminder that full benefit programs that fall under EBD Medicaid. So we have this broad, I always refer to it as a bucket. That's how I picture it in my head. Where we have SSI related Medicaid, where somebody's getting SSI, they're going to be eligible for Medicaid. Special status Medicaid, Medicaid Purchase Plan or MAP, which I was just referring to, Katie Beckett program, Wisconsin Well Woman Medicaid, long-term care programs, which we will look at some of the waivers as well. But the most significance between Badger Care Plus eligibility and EBD Medicaid programs tends to be the asset test. And I think that's something that trips people up. But diving further into MAP, and again, this is the one that I get the most questions about. MAP is for individuals with a disability who are working or enrolled in a health and employment counseling program. Program has higher income asset limits to allow members to get healthcare coverage while they're employed. So they do get to work somewhat. And then the income limit for MAP is 250% FPL, which is different than most other programs. The asset limit for MAP is $15,000, looking only at the members' assets. MAP member and their spouse's net income is compared to the income limit for the household size. And then so MAP allows some deductions, which I have yet to discover a shorthand to remember off the top of my head. So there's $20 standard deduction, and then $65, and then half an earned income deduction, an impairment-related work expense deduction, special exempt income deduction, and then the medical and remedial expense deduction if the total of the applicant and spouse is above 500, which it may very well be at that point. And this is, I pulled this, I think, directly from the pre-licensing because it again, bears going back to school to unpack EB Medicaid this way. Yeah, so that's MAP in a nutshell. And I unfortunately don't have an example because I just didn't think I would have time. And I'm pretty sure that we do not, but we can definitely take MAP related questions to the Q&A on Friday, or if there is time at the end here. And then other Medicaid programs, there's one I want to highlight specifically because it is after MAP, probably outside of the normal programs. The question I get the most is about IRIS, and that is Include, Respect, I Self-Direct, which I have worked with people who administer IRIS. I've worked with people who help consumers in IRIS. And, you know, I've known these people and I've had them re-explain IRIS to me many, many times. And sometimes I still feel like I don't get it. But it is a home and community-based waiver program, and we can use that as kind of a microcosm to look at some of the other HCBW programs. In this case, for IRIS, certain payments received by live-in care providers who provide care for someone enrolled in the program are not counted for Badger Care Plus under Managed budgeting rules. So this relates back to a specific example that came up recently for the Enrollment Sister listserv. And as with other home community-based waiver programs, in order to not be counted, IRIS payments must meet several criteria. So those criteria, so thinking again for basically any home community-based waiver program, payments for services provided to an IRIS member must be written in that plan of care and that HCBW's plan of care. Payments for skilled services like those from a nurse or other health professional don't count. They're not eligible for the exemption for be counted as income. So it's probably more likely a relative or a family member taking care of that person, although it doesn't have to be. Payments made to a live-in care provider for services provided while the care provider and the IRIS member are living in the same home. So again, it may be related to, but not necessarily, but they will be in the same home for those to be disregarded. And the live-in care provider is not providing care to more than 10 people younger than age 19, so, or 5 people 19 or older. So again, this is kind of a specific situation where usually we see it's one-to-one, take care of one person or maybe 2 parents. I don't think I've ever seen it more than 2, although I'm certain someone has. But there are those limits on the number of people in the home receiving that care. If the payments received by the live-in care provider meet those criteria, they're not going to be counted when determining eligibility for Badger Care Plus. And then if payments received by the live-in care provider do not meet that, they must be treated like any other countable earnings, more like self-employment income. And then the section in the handbook is linked up here, or not linked up, but it can be. It's referenced here. And then I want to dive into Marketplace while we have time. I'm not covering too many complex examples of the Marketplace, just because I had the DHS support and wanted to take advantage of it. But we will look at some of the more common complex scenarios. That's not an oxymoron, before diving back into Q&A. So some tax situations, in order to qualify for APTCs, you have married couples. I think sisters know this pretty well. They have to be filing jointly on the healthcare.gov application. There are some exceptions to this. People did ask me whether or not there were exceptions, and Health Forum Beyond the Basics just covered these 2, I think, fairly recently. So there's head of household, which is incorporated in healthcare.gov, which we'll look at in just a second in detail because there are 5 criteria for it. And then victims of domestic abuse and people who have been abandoned or suffered spousal abandonment. Both of those can be situations where somebody can be married and filing singly and still get a tax credit. In those cases, you would indicate on the application that they are filing singly, even though that wouldn't look correct, but even the help text verifies the healthcare.gov application that is the right thing to do. But for that head of household exception, so married person considered unmarried and eligible for head of household, they can answer yes to all 5 of these. So they're going to file taxes separately. It's kind of the point here. They're going to live apart from their spouse July 1st to December 31st. They're going to pay more than half of the cost keeping up their home. They're the main home of a child. That includes stepchild, foster child, more than half of the year. And then they're eligible to claim that child as dependent. So if they're able to claim all of those things, if their answer to all of those is yes, they can file as head of household and still get APTCs. Special rule allows the resident, spouse of non-resident, for tax purposes or as defined by tax purposes, to qualify, considered unmarried if they have a qualifying person and meet other tests as well. So they'd be eligible to claim a child even if the child is ultimately claimed by the non-custodial parent. So that's kind of a complex one. But fortunately for head of household, the application does a pretty nice job steering you towards the head of household circumstances, whereas the other ones kind of require you to indicate that they're filing singly, even though it's maybe not what your first instinct would be. Qualifying relative, this one I think comes up a lot more commonly, or at least this is one that I have encountered more, where you have somebody who's not a qualifying child. They need to be a citizen or have legal permanent resident status to be able to be claimed. They receive more than half of their financial support from the tax filer, which in these situations is pretty common. They have to live in the same household and earn less than $4,400 annually. So we see this where somebody's counted as dependent despite not being related or being married. But you may see this in your work, I think, fairly often. And then a few immigration status reminders. And I apologize for the speed now. I'm trying to get us to that final Q&A because we are short on time. This is a lot. Legal permanent residents are eligible to enroll in coverage of the marketplace. So they've got legal permanent resident status. They can get APTCs even if they haven't been here for 5 years. Those folks are going to end up in the marketplace. We see that all the time. Lawfully present immigrants who have incomes below 100% FPL can also get APTCs. That is another pretty common question. So you might have somebody who makes nothing or it makes very little and is at 33% FPL. They're still going to be able to get tax credits in the marketplace. And even if their income is zero, just remember that they're going to need to file taxes. I think earlier this year, we saw tax professional or tax site, something saying they can't, but they absolutely can file taxes and they should to reconcile those APTCs. And the refugees are not subject to the 5-year waiting period for Medicaid, even if they change their status later and become a legal permanent resident. And all of those statuses can be found in the Medicaid handbook, for example, and the Badger Care handbook. And then one important question or common consideration that I want people, especially those new assisters, to take away from this, if nothing else, and this is on that chart that I referenced towards the very beginning, if you can remember that long ago, is the yearly guidelines from Health Reform Beyond the Basics. It includes this repayment limits on APTCs because people will often ask what happens if they get their income wrong? What happens if they underestimate their income? They overestimate their income, that's great. They'll get more money back. But if they underestimate their income, they want to know what they're going to be on the hook for. And these are really, really useful because people will be right at those different thresholds and they want to know, what is my maximum exposure here? What is the most I could possibly pay back if I get this wrong? And then, of course, the danger area being if somebody is at 400% FPL or above, and says they're going to be lower or thinks they're going to be lower and they're above, in that case, they could end up on the hook for all of the APTCs they shouldn't have gotten. Although currently people do get APTCs above 400% FPL through 2025, but they would still be on the hook for what they shouldn't have gotten. But these are really useful and this will come up. If you do this work for even, I think, one open enrollment period, this will come up for you a lot. So you'll want to have this chart handy to reference these repayment caps for people. All right, and more. If we didn't cover enough and more, I know we've got about 10 minutes-ish left for our final Q&A. And I'm kind of excited to see what people came up with. And doesn't really matter. This is meant to be marketplace, but we can always dive back into Badger Care and EBD as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to read through some of these questions. I don't know if either Maciel or Rachel, if you guys want to help. There's a lot, so I don't think we'll get through all of them.
We will take them to the office hours, I promise. We will start with ones that got asked here at the office hours.
Yeah, Maciel or Rachel, any ones you'd like to prioritize?
There's a question related to the Badger Care Plus extensions. Like, is there a cap as to how much the increase can be to remain on the extension? And it's my understanding that there is no upper limit on the extension. It's a temporary extension for folks so that they can maintain that income increase without worrying about losing their eligibility for health care. Rachel, did I summarize that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Maciel. The important thing for that is that it's a the parent or caretaker relative or pregnant person. I think we're mostly talking about probably parent caretaker relatives here, that the parent or caretaker relative had income below, that they were eligible with the regular Badger Care Plus income monthly income limit for the at least 3 of the last 6 months, and then their income increased over to 100% monthly, and so that's why they entered the extension, and that's really the criteria. That's the important part. As far as how high their income goes after that, that does not factor into their eligibility for the extension.
There is a question regarding is per capita distributions from tribal revenues counted as income? My understanding is that it is.
Yes, it is for Badger Care Plus. Tribal per capita is counted. It does get a little bit complicated when we're talking about folks who are enrolled in EBD Medicaid programs. So it is counted for care and the long-term care programs, such as institutional Medicaid, family care, the home and community-based waivers, and so on. But for other EBD Medicaid programs, we disregard the first $500 of the monthly tribal per capita payments, and then we count the remainder of that over the $500. So it does get a little bit complicated when we're talking about the EBD Medicaid, depending on the program the person's in.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just checking here to see.
Real quick, Maciel, going back to the extension, the question about if people are notified if they're in an extension. Yes, so they will receive a notice of decision, like they do with any other changes to their eligibility, that will explain that they are in an extension.
Thank you.
That language exists online anywhere as a sample language. I haven't seen the extension language in forever.
I think it just says.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Moss.
I was going to say, I think it just shows that they're covered. Okay. It's more of a background type of program and processing, and they're just covered, and that they'll be notified when they have to do a renewal and such. Gotcha. But Rachel, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're basically right, Maciel. I mean, these folks are Badger Care Plus members. And so we call them Badger Care Plus members. We say they're enrolled in Badger Care Plus. There might be just a little bit of information, maybe in the more information section on the notice that maybe says that they're an extension. But Maciel, I can work with you outside of this meeting, and maybe we can find what that text is if there is anything.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a tangent. Yeah, we don't need to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll be getting all of these questions after this presentation so that we can work on that. There's a marketplace question for you, Adam. It says, sure. Is Social Security surviving benefit counted as income?
Oh, that's a really good question. Sisters, jump in if I'm wrong with this, but I think it is.
And then
I'm fully prepared to be wrong on that, so definitely jump in on chat if I am.
Okay, so I'll move on to another question. What about college student? What would be an exception for, the questions move when there's a new one in, sorry, for them not to qualify based on income limit? I think we're gonna have to bring that one back. Francisco, if you can email us and give us a little bit more on that question, that would be great.
Yeah, please.
Let's see here, I thought it would be easy. Here's a question regarding MAP. In regards to the independent accounts, what fees are charged for those who save more than 50% of their income a year? I think that one's really specific, and we should bring that one back. Let me know if you agree.
Yeah, I agree, Maciel. I think there looks to be a couple of questions on the MAP independence accounts, and those are specific. And to be honest, I'm not a MAP. We'll take that back. We'll take those MAP independence account questions back.
And then there's a couple of IRIS questions as well. I would venture that we need to bring those back too.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. That's one reason we can't get into that level of detail in a presentation like this, that big, the whole topic, is because of those complexities. But we have DHS who's happy to take those back, and we can supply those answers to everybody after the fact.
And then just to let you know, Tina says that she believes you're correct, Adam, regarding the survivors benefit. What should people know about the COBRA coverage?
I think that's specific to Marketplace. So Cobra is interesting. So especially for dual sisters, you want to be really careful if you see somebody who is offered Cobra, because odds are they're going to be better off not taking it and taking it tax credit through the Marketplace instead. If they're not eligible for a Medicaid program, you're always going to want to check Medicaid first. But if they do take it, then they do lose their eligibility for APTCs while they're enrolled in COBRA, and they can't just drop it and get into the Marketplace, which is unfortunate. So if you find somebody, ideally it's while they're making that decision. There are reasons to take COBRA depending on their health situation, depending on how much they paid towards their health insurance already, the time of year. There are definitely factors that somebody might want to take it, but by and large, they're usually better off going to the Marketplace. If somebody is on COBRA, they can get into Marketplace still during open enrollment with APTCs. So with us coming up on open enrollment here, that is a good time if you encounter somebody who didn't have that information, ended up taking COBRA anyway.
Adam, there's another Marketplace one, I believe, because it's referring to a family glitch. The question is, can you please review what happened with the family glitch last year and how that works? Is that something that's easily able to be shared, or should we take that back?
No, we can cover that. So family glitch is something I'm hoping, excited for new assisters, brand new ones, not have to learn. But previously, if somebody had access to employer-sponsored coverage, and it was affordable. We didn't talk about affordability, but in your training you will have. And right now that percentage is going to be 8.39% of their income or less for next year. If that family coverage, or if the individual coverage was over that limit, or under that limit, considered affordable, then they would be required to take that employer coverage, even though the family coverage was so much more expensive that they wouldn't be able to pay for it. That having been fixed last year means that if those premiums for the family coverage are up to that 8.39%, if they're over that, then the family can go to the Marketplace and get tax credits while the individual stays on the employer-sponsored coverage. So you'll have kind of a divided household situation, but it is awesome that the family will get covered with tax credits.
Adam, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay, good. Your screen went blank, so I just wanted to double check. We can still hear you. So there's a question regarding SSI widow benefits. Widow benefits for SSI. Is that counted for the Marketplace as well? Do you know?
I would want to look that up. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. I will mark that as taking that back.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I know, Allison, do you need to come back on? I don't know if we're at where we're at.
Yeah, I think we're at time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think
we'll take all of these back. We'll address as many as we can during office hours, and any that we don't get to outside.
Yeah.
Thank you,
wow.
everybody.
So thank you so much. This has been an excellent session and really great questions that have been posed in our Q&A. And as you heard Adam and Maciel and Rachel share, those will be taken back and we'll post those on our website. And I realized that before we drop off here, I neglected to announce yesterday's attendee gift card winner, and that is Gregory Hay. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but congratulations. And you will be the recipient of a gift card. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will see you again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Huge thanks to Maciel and Rachel for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.